The pain came in waves, each one stronger than the last, pulling Cicely Carroll under like she was drowning in her own body. She pressed both palms against her swollen belly, feeling hope push and twist inside her, desperate to enter a world that had just revealed itself to be far crueler than Cicely ever imagined. Rain hammered against the bedroom windows, matching the chaos building inside her. Each drop a tiny drumbeat, counting down to the moment everything would change forever. Samuel had kissed her forehead hours ago, his lips barely making contact before his phone buzzed and his attention scattered like it always did lately. Something about urgent documents needing signatures, investors who couldn't wait until morning, the usual excuses she'd stopped questioning because questioning meant doubting. And she'd promised herself she'd never be the kind of wife who doubted. That promise felt like ash in her mouth now. The first real contraction doubled her over, stealing her breath and replacing it with fire. Cicely gripped the edge of the dresser she'd painted herself last month, the soft yellow color now seeming absurdly cheerful. She'd imagined standing here with Samuel, both of them exhausted and happy, welcoming their daughter home to this carefully prepared nursery. The crib waited in the corner, sheets crisp and white, a mobile of stars hanging above it that played a lullaby she'd spent an hour choosing. The rocking chair her mother had given them sat by the window, cushions embroidered with Hope's name that Cicely had stitched herself during the long afternoons when Samuel was at the office. All of it suddenly felt like props in a play where she was the only one who didn't know the script had changed. Another contraction tore through her, stronger this time, and Cicely fumbled for her phone with shaking fingers. She typed the message through blurred vision, each word an act of faith that was about to be shattered into pieces too small to ever put back together. Her hands trembled as she hit send, watching the message deliver with that small check mark that used to bring her comfort when Samuel responded quickly. The message sent, and she waited, counting her heartbeats, trying to breathe through the pain like the classes had taught her. The classes Samuel had missed because of meetings, because of travel, because of reasons that sounded legitimate until you stacked them all together and saw the pattern underneath. She'd gone alone to every single class, surrounded by couples holding hands and practicing breathing techniques together. Pretending it didn't hurt that her husband was always somewhere else. Her phone stayed dark and silent. Minutes crawled by, each one an eternity. Cicely called instead, pressing the phone to her ear so hard it hurt, listening to it ring once, twice, 3 times. "Pick up," she thought desperately. "Pick up and tell me you're on your way. Tell me I'm imagining the distance between us. Tell me I'm wrong about the feeling in my gut that's been growing alongside our daughter." The ringing stopped. Someone answered. "Samuel?" Cicely's voice came out broken and small. Nothing like the strong woman she'd worked so hard to become, but the voice that replied wasn't his. "He's not available right now." A woman's voice, smooth and cold as winter glass. "This is Vanessa." Cicely knew that name. Vanessa Whitmore, Samuel's colleague, the one Cicely had welcomed into their home countless times, whose career Cicely had helped nurture when she first started working with Samuel. The woman Cicely had given advice to about navigating their industry, about handling difficult clients, about work-life balance and professional growth. The woman who'd sent Cicely a thoughtful baby gift just last month with a card saying how lucky Hope would be to have Cicely as a mother. Where's Samuel? Another contraction hit, and Cicely couldn't keep the pain from her voice. "I'm in labor. I need him. Please, I need him right now." The silence that followed lasted forever, and no time at all. When Vanessa spoke again, her words fell like stones into still water, sending ripples that would never stop spreading. "Samuel asked me to take this call. He wanted me to tell you that he's done, Cicely. We've been together for a long time now, longer than you probably want to know. He's building a real future, and that future is with me. You should have the baby alone. It's better this way. Cleaner, he's already moved on, and you need to do the same." The words didn't make sense at first. Cicely's brain couldn't process them. kept trying to rearrange them into something that fit the reality she'd been living in. But they wouldn't rearrange. They just sat there, ugly and solid and true. "You're lying," Cicely heard herself say it, heard the desperation in her own voice. "Samuel wouldn't. We're having a baby. We're married. We're building a life together. We're happy." Vanessa's laugh was sharp enough to draw blood. "Is that what you thought this was? Samuel's been planning this for months, Cicely. The house is already in my name. The accounts you don't know about are secured. You were a chapter he's closing. Have the baby alone and move on. We already have." The line went dead. Cicely stood frozen in the nursery she'd painted, holding her belly while her daughter kicked and twisted, ready to be born into a world where her father had already abandoned her. The pain in her body was nothing compared to the pain cracking her chest open, making it impossible to breathe or think or do anything except feel the weight of her own stupidity crushing her. All those late nights, all those trips, all those times Samuel had seemed distant and distracted, and she'd told herself it was stress, it was work, it was the pressure of impending fatherhood. All those times she'd caught him smiling at his phone, and he'd explained it away as a funny message from a colleague. All those times he'd come home smelling different, wearing cologne she hadn't bought him, and she'd convinced herself she was being paranoid. The signs had been everywhere, and she'd been too trusting to see them. Another contraction hit, violent and demanding, and Cicely's water broke in a warm rush that soaked through her nightgown and pooled on the floor she'd cleaned just yesterday. She looked down at the mess. At her bare feet, standing in fluid that should have signaled joy, but now just meant she was alone and terrified and about to give birth without anyone who loved her beside her. Her phone was still in her hand. She scrolled through contacts with numb fingers, past Samuel's name, because calling him again would mean begging, and she'd never beg him for anything ever again. Past friends who didn't know she was in labor yet, who wouldn't understand the urgency or the devastation. Landing finally on the one person who'd always answered, who'd always come, who'd warned Cicely about Samuel in the beginning, before Cicely got defensive, and they fought and almost didn't speak for months. Jolene, her younger sister, her person. The phone rang once before Jolene picked up, her voice thick with sleep but immediately alert when she heard Cicely's breathing. "Cece? What's wrong? Talk to me." "The baby's coming." Cicely could barely get the words out through the pain and shock. "Jolene, I need you. Samuel's gone. He's been with someone else and he's gone, and the baby's coming, and I can't do this alone. I can't." "You're not alone. I'm coming right now. Right now, you hear me? Don't move. Don't do anything. Just breathe. I'm 10 minutes away, baby sister. 10 minutes. Hurry!" Cicely slid down to sit on the floor, her back against the wall, one hand on her belly and the other clutching the phone like it was the only solid thing in a world that had just turned to quicksand. "Please hurry. I'm so scared. I know you are, but you're the strongest person I know, and you're going to get through this. Keep breathing. Talk to me. Tell me what happened." Cicely tried to explain through contractions and tears, her words coming out fractured and desperate. Jolene listened while throwing on clothes and running to her car, making comforting sounds and promises that everything would be okay, even though they both knew nothing would ever be okay again in the way it had been. "I'm already in the car. Stay with me, Cece. Stay on the line. Don't hang up." Cicely closed her eyes and listened to her sister's voice through the phone, to the sound of an engine starting and tires on wet pavement, to promises that help was coming. But underneath all of it, she could still hear Vanessa's cold voice telling her that Samuel was done, that this had all been planned, that Cicely was the only one who didn't know the marriage ended before the baby even began. She made herself a promise right there on the nursery floor, water pooling around her and contractions ripping through her body with increasing intensity. Samuel Pollard would never see her cry over him. He'd never see her broken or desperate or weak. He'd walked away from her at the moment she needed him most, and she would make sure that was the biggest mistake he ever made. Hope kicked hard against Cicely's ribs, as if agreeing with her mother's silent vow. When Jolene burst through the front door minutes later, calling Cicely's name with panic in her voice, she found her sister still sitting on the nursery floor, but with her chin lifted and her jaw set with determination. "Let's go have this baby," Cicely said, her voice steadier than it had any right to be. "Let's show him what he's missing." Jolene helped her up, grabbed the hospital bag that Cicely had packed weeks ago when she still believed Samuel would be there to carry it, and guided them both out into the rain toward the car that would take them to Memorial Grace Hospital. The drive was a blur of contractions and traffic lights, and Jolene's steady commentary about everything except Samuel, filling the silence with stories about their childhood and predictions about what hope would look like, and promises that their mother would be at the hospital before dawn. But Cicely didn't cry. Not when another contraction hit so hard she thought she might pass out. Not when Jolene asked what happened and Cicely had to say the words out loud for the first time. Not when they pulled up to the emergency entrance and nurses rushed out with a wheelchair, surrounding her with professional efficiency. The crying would come later. Right now, Cicely Carroll had a daughter to bring into the world, and she was going to do it with or without the man who'd promised to stand beside her. She was going to do it alone, because Samuel had already made his choice. And someday, somehow, he was going to regret every second of what he'd thrown away. Chapter 2. The Doctor Who Stayed. The delivery room lights burned too bright, turning everything into stark shadows and harsh reality. Cicely gripped the bed rails while her body worked to push hope into the world, each contraction a reminder that she was doing this alone, despite being surrounded by strangers in scrubs. Jolene held her hand, whispering encouragement that Cicely could barely hear over the roaring in her ears. But there was an emptiness beside the bed where Samuel should have been. And that emptiness felt like another person in the room, cold and accusatory and impossible to ignore. The pain was overwhelming, consuming, the kind that made her understand why women throughout history had feared childbirth. But worse than the physical pain was the emotional devastation of knowing she was bringing hope into a broken world, into a family that had shattered before she even took her first breath. "We need more hands here." The nurse's voice carried an edge of worry that made Cicely's heart stutter with fear. "She's bleeding too much. Get someone from obstetrics now." More people rushed in, their movements efficient but urgent in a way that penetrated even through Cicely's pain-fogged brain. Something was wrong, something beyond the obvious wrongness of being abandoned, beyond the shattering of her marriage, beyond all the emotional wounds that were still bleeding fresh. Her body was failing her too, because apparently one catastrophe wasn't enough for a single night. Cicely felt panic rising in her throat. She couldn't die. Not now. Not when hope needed her more than ever. Not when she was the only parent her daughter would have. Then a new voice cut through the chaos, calm and certain and somehow familiar. "I've got her. Everyone take a breath and let me see what we're working with here." Cicely's vision swam, but she could make out a man in surgical scrubs moving to the foot of the bed with practiced efficiency, his hands already gloved, his presence somehow settling the frenetic energy in the room like a conductor taking control of an orchestra. He looked up at her, and for just a second, their eyes met across the chaos. "I'm Peter Baker. I'm going to help you bring your daughter into this world safely." His voice held no judgment, no pity, just steady assurance that felt like an anchor in the storm. "Can you tell me your name?" "Cicely," she gasped it out between contractions. "Cicely Carroll. Cicely, I need you to trust me right now. Your body is working incredibly hard, but we need to work together. Can you do that for me and your daughter?" She nodded, and something about the directness in his gaze steadied her. He wasn't treating her like she was broken or pitiful or a tragedy. He was treating her like she was strong enough to handle the truth. "You're hemorrhaging more than we'd like to see." That means when I tell you to push, you push with everything you have. We're going to get Hope here safe, and we're going to take care of you, too. Your daughter needs you to be strong for just a little while longer. Understood? Understood. Cicely heard her own voice, surprised to find it didn't shake, despite the terror coursing through her. What followed was pain, unlike anything she'd imagined, the kind that carved away everything except survival instinct. Peter talked her through every contraction, his voice the only constant in the chaos. Push, breathe, push again. You're doing beautifully, Cicely. Almost there. I can see her head. She has dark hair like yours. One more, just one more. Give me one more big push. Cicely bore down with everything she had left, screaming through the effort, feeling something tear inside her but not caring, because Hope needed to be born, needed to be safe, needed to be alive. And then Hope was there, screaming with healthy lungs that filled the room with the most beautiful sound Cicely had ever heard, covered in blood and vernix and absolutely perfect. Peter placed her on Cicely's chest with gentle hands, and their eyes met again over the squalling infant. You did it. She's here and she's gorgeous. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and lungs that work perfectly. Cicely looked down at her daughter, at this tiny person who just fought her way into the world alongside her mother, and felt something crack open in her chest. Not breaking, opening, making room for a fierce love that had no space for the man who'd abandoned them both. Hello, Hope. She whispered it through tears that finally came now that it was safe to cry. Hello, my girl. I'm your mama, and I promise you'll always be enough for me. You'll never have to wonder if you're loved. I promise you that. The medical team worked around her, delivering the placenta, stitching tears that Cicely barely felt, monitoring vital signs, speaking in hushed tones about blood loss and transfusions. Cicely barely registered any of it, too focused on Hope's tiny face, on counting her perfect fingers and toes, on memorizing every detail of this moment that Samuel had chosen to miss. Miss Carroll. Peter's voice drew her attention after what might have been minutes or hours. He'd stepped back to let the nurses work, but he hadn't left like doctors usually did after delivery. You lost more blood than I'd like, so we're going to keep you here for close monitoring. But you and Hope are going to be fine. You both fought hard tonight. Thank you. The words felt woefully inadequate for what he'd done. You saved us. Both of us. You saved yourself. I just helped things along. He smiled, and it transformed his whole face from professionally competent to genuinely warm. Something kind lived behind his eyes, something that recognized pain without pitying it. Get some rest. I'll check on you both in a few hours. But he didn't check in a few hours. He checked every hour for the rest of his shift, finding excuses to stop by Cicely's room, even though she had her own assigned nurse, making sure her bleeding had stabilized, confirming Hope was feeding well, asking if Cicely needed anything for pain, if the room was too cold, if Jolene needed coffee or food from the cafeteria. The attention felt excessive for a patient he'd never met before tonight, but Cicely was too exhausted and emotionally raw to question it. Jolene noticed, though. When Peter left after his third visit, she raised an eyebrow at her sister with a knowing look. That doctor is checking on you a lot. Like a lot. He probably checks on all his patients this way. Cicely shifted Hope in her arms, wincing at the soreness that radiated through her entire body. I hemorrhaged. I'm probably high risk. I've had a baby. Isisi. They don't check this much unless something's seriously wrong or they're worried about you specifically for reasons that aren't medical. Jolene's voice softened. I think he sees what I see. A woman who just went through hell and is trying to act like she's fine when she's clearly not. I'm not fine, Cicely admitted quietly, looking down at Hope, who'd fallen asleep against her chest. I'm so far from fine I can't even see fine from here. But I have to be fine because she needs me to be. You don't have to perform strength for anyone, baby sister. It's okay to fall apart. If I fall apart, I'm afraid I'll never be able to put myself back together. They sat in silence after that. Jolene holding Cicely's free hand while Hope slept and the hospital hummed with nighttime activity beyond their door. When Peter came back late that night, well after his shift should have ended, Cicely was awake, despite the exhaustion dragging at her. Hope slept in the bassinet beside her bed, and Cicely was staring at the ceiling, unable to quiet her mind enough to rest. "Can't sleep." Peter's voice was soft, trying not to wake the baby. "Every time I close my eyes, I hear her voice telling me he's done with me, that he's been done with me for months while I walked around glowing and stupid and completely blind." Cicely turned her head to look at him, too tired to hide her devastation anymore. "Why are you still here? Your shift ended hours ago." Peter pulled a chair closer to her bed and sat down, which felt like crossing some invisible line between doctor and something else entirely, because I recognize that look in your eyes. The one that says you're trying to hold yourself together with both hands, but you're not sure how much longer you can manage it. He paused, seeming to wrestle with how much to reveal. "My wife died giving birth 3 years ago. Our son died with her. It happened in this hospital while I was on duty, and I couldn't save either of them." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest, and utterly unexpected. "I'm so sorry." Cicely's voice was barely a whisper, her own pain momentarily forgotten in the face of his. "That's unimaginable. It was the worst night of my life." "Still is." Peter's eyes were distant, seeing something Cicely couldn't. "I threw myself into work afterward, kept everyone at arm's length, convinced myself I was cursed, or dangerous, or somehow responsible for losing them. I became a machine who delivered babies and went home to an empty apartment and counted the days without really living through any of them." "What changed?" "Nothing changed. I just got better at pretending I was okay." He looked at her directly then. "Until tonight, when I delivered your daughter and watched you fight through pain and betrayal and blood loss with this incredible strength. Something in me recognized something in you. We're both survivors of our worst nightmares. And I just wanted you to know that if you need someone who understands what it's like when your whole world falls apart in a single moment, I'm here." Cicely felt tears sliding down her temples, pooling in her ears. "I thought I'd never trust anyone again. I thought Samuel broke that part of me permanently. He broke your trust in him. That's not the same as breaking your ability to trust. Don't let him take that from you too." Peter's voice was gentle but firm. "You're allowed to be devastated. You're allowed to be angry. You're allowed to fall apart. But don't let him convince you that what he did means you're broken. You're not broken, Cicely. You're wounded, and that's different. Wounds can heal." They sat in comfortable silence after that, Peter asking nothing of her, just being present while Cicely cried quietly and Hope slept, and the world outside the hospital window slowly lightened toward dawn. At some point, Jolene returned with coffee and breakfast sandwiches, taking in the scene with knowing eyes but saying nothing. When Peter finally left, promising to check on them the next day during his rounds, he squeezed Cicely's hand gently and told her something she desperately needed to hear. "You're going to survive this. I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but you will. And someday you'll look back and realize that this terrible night was the beginning of something better than what you lost." Cicely watched him go and felt something unexpected stirring beneath her grief and anger. Not attraction exactly, not yet, but recognition. Like finding someone who spoke the same language of loss, who understood that healing wasn't linear or simple or quick. Someone who'd walked through fire and come out scarred but still capable of kindness. For the first time since Vanessa's voice had shattered her reality into pieces, Cicely felt like maybe she could survive this, after all. Maybe survival was possible. Maybe there was life after devastation. Hope stirred in her bassinet, making small, hungry sounds, and Cicely reached for her daughter with hands that didn't shake quite as badly as they had hours ago. Small progress, but progress nonetheless. Chapter 3. The Slow Return to Living. Cicely moved into her mother Dolores's narrow row house with Hope, sleeping in her childhood bedroom with peeling wallpaper and a crib wedged between her bed and the wall. The house smelled like the lavender sachets her mother still tucked into every drawer, like comfort and safety, and a past when Cicely believed the world was fundamentally good. Everything about the space was small and cramped, and nothing like the suburban house she'd left behind. But it was offered with love, and that made all the difference. Samuel's divorce papers arrived via courier on Hope's one-week birthday, destroying any small hope Cicely had been nursing that maybe he'd come to his senses. She was nursing hope when the doorbell rang, and Jolene signed for the thick manila envelope with a scowl that could have melted steel. "Don't open it yet." Jolene set the envelope on the kitchen table like it might explode. "Wait until you're ready. Wait until you're strong enough." But Cicely was tired of waiting, tired of letting Samuel control the narrative, tired of being a victim in her own story. She opened the envelope with one hand while Hope nursed, and read through settlement terms that felt like another betrayal layered on top of all the others, like poison building in her system. Samuel claimed sole ownership of everything they'd built together over 7 years. The house was already in Vanessa's name through refinancing Cicely had never known about, her signature forged on documents she'd never seen. Their joint accounts had been emptied months ago into accounts only he could access. He was offering minimal support for Hope while demanding a DNA test to confirm paternity, as if Cicely had been the unfaithful one, as if she hadn't spent their entire marriage being loyal while he destroyed them. "He's been planning this for months, maybe longer." Cicely's voice came out flat and dead, shock numbing her to everything except the words on the page. "Every smile, every conversation, every time he touched me while I was pregnant, he was already halfway out the door. He was already with her." Dolores, who'd been quietly making tea at the stove, set down her cup with enough force to rattle the saucer against the counter. "That man is going to regret what he's done to you. Mark my words, Cicely. I've known women who've lost husbands to death, to war, to terrible accidents beyond anyone's control, and they grieved honestly and rebuilt their lives with dignity. But a man who walks away from his pregnant wife, who abandons his child before she's even born, that's not a man. That's a coward, and cowards always get exactly what they deserve eventually. I just want him gone from my life completely." Cicely looked down at Hope, who'd fallen asleep mid-feed, milk-drunk and peaceful in that way only babies can be. "I want to forget he exists. I want to pretend Hope came from nowhere, that she's just mine. Honey, you can't forget someone who shaped 7 years of your life, but you can decide he doesn't get to define your future." Dolores sat down at the table, reaching across to take Cicely's free hand. "That man took enough from you. Don't let him take your ability to trust or love or hope for better things." But forgetting wasn't possible when lawyers needed documentation, when phone calls came with questions about assets and timelines, when Jolene spent nights combing through old emails trying to prove Cicely's contributions to Samuel's success. The legal process was its own form of torture, forcing Cicely to relive her marriage in excruciating detail. What Jolene found was worse than anyone expected. "Cece, you need to see this." Jolene's face was pale when she showed up 3 days later with printouts that shook in her hands. "Samuel didn't just plan to leave you. He systematically erased you from your own life, like you were a problem to solve, rather than a person he'd promised to love." The evidence was damning. Emails showing Samuel had changed passwords to accounts they'd shared, removing Cicely's access one by one over the course of months. Messages to colleagues claiming Cicely was having mental health issues, to explain why she wasn't around their social circle anymore. Documentation of the refinancing that put their house solely in Vanessa's name. Signatures that Jolene's paralegal training recognized as forgeries. Bank transfers moving money into accounts Cicely didn't know existed. But the worst discovery was tucked in an email chain from nearly 2 years ago, casual and cruel in its matter-of-fact tone. Samuel had gotten a vasectomy reversal without telling Cicely, timing it with the start of his affair with Vanessa, who apparently wanted children. Hope hadn't been the planned blessing Cicely thought they'd created together. She'd been an accident that complicated Samuel's exit strategy, an inconvenience he'd decided to handle by abandoning them both rather than adjusting his timeline. Cicely held the printouts with shaking hands, trying to understand how the man she'd married could have become someone so calculating and cruel. The man who'd courted her with poetry and promises. The man who'd cried when she accepted his proposal. That man had become this monster who saw his wife and daughter as obstacles rather than human beings worthy of basic decency. He never loved me. Or maybe he did once, and then I just became an obstacle between him and whatever he thought he deserved. She said it aloud for the first time, testing how the words felt in her mouth. They tasted like ash and devastation. Stop that right now. Dolores took the papers away from Cicely and pulled her daughter into her arms fiercely. Don't you dare let him make you question whether you were worthy of love. You were everything a good wife should be, loyal and supportive and kind and strong. You built him up when he was nobody. You sacrificed your own dreams to make his come true. And he threw it all away because something inside him is fundamentally broken. That's not your failure, baby. That's his. That's all his. Cicely cried then, really cried for the first time since Hope's birth, sobbing into her mother's shoulder, while Jolene held Hope and Dolores murmured the same comforts she'd whispered when Cicely was small, and the world hurt too much. She cried for the marriage she'd believed in, for the man she'd thought Samuel was, for the future she'd imagined that would never exist, for the innocence she'd lost when Vanessa's voice shattered everything. When the tears finally stopped, Cicely felt hollowed out but somehow lighter, like crying had drained some of the poison that had been building inside her, making room for something else. Not happiness yet, but maybe the possibility of it someday. I need to get out of this house for a few hours. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, suddenly desperate for fresh air. I need to remember what normal feels like, even if it's just for an afternoon. Jolene offered to watch Hope, and Dolores insisted Cicely take some money to buy herself lunch somewhere nice, to treat herself to something that felt luxurious. Cicely found herself driving toward Memorial Grace Hospital, telling herself she just wanted to walk through their gardens that she'd heard were beautiful, that it had nothing to do with hoping to run into a certain doctor who'd shown her unexpected kindness. But she was lying to herself, and she knew it. Some part of her needed to see Peter Baker again, needed to connect with someone who understood devastation without pitying her for it. She found him in the hospital cafeteria during what was apparently his lunch break, eating a sandwich while reviewing charts with intense concentration. He looked tired, shadows under his eyes, suggesting he'd been working too much, pulling extra shifts, filling his hours with work so he wouldn't have to go home to an empty apartment. Something about his exhaustion made him seem more human and less like the composed professional who'd delivered hope. Cicely almost walked away. Then he looked up and saw her, and his whole face changed, transformed by a smile so genuine it made her breath catch. Cicely. He stood, nearly knocking over his coffee in his haste. How are you? How's Hope? Is everything okay? We're surviving. She walked over to his table, suddenly feeling foolish but unable to turn back now. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd take a walk through your gardens. Everyone says they're beautiful this time of year. They are, Peter gestured to the empty chair across from him with obvious pleasure, but they're even better with company. Have you eaten lunch yet? She hadn't, and suddenly she was starving. They went through the cafeteria line together, Cicely loading her tray with actual food instead of the crackers and yogurt she'd been surviving on, Peter quietly paying for both meals before she could protest or feel embarrassed about accepting his generosity. They found a corner table away from the lunch rush and talked about everything except the obvious. About how Philadelphia sports teams seemed cursed to disappoint their fans year after year. About whether the rain would ever stop or if they'd all grow gills eventually. About the best places to get authentic cheesesteaks, which sparked a good-natured argument about Pat's versus Gino's that made them both laugh with surprising ease. It felt shockingly normal, and Cicely realized she was having her first real conversation since Hope's birth that didn't revolve around lawyers or betrayal or survival tactics. She was just talking to another person about mundane things, and it felt like medicine for wounds she didn't know how to treat. "Thank you," she said it suddenly, interrupting Peter's passionate defense of a small shop in South Philly that she'd never heard of, but now wanted to try. "For what?" "For treating me like a person instead of a tragedy. Everyone else looks at me with pity, and I'm so tired of being pitied. Tired of being the abandoned wife, the cautionary tale, the woman whose husband left her in labor." Peter set down his sandwich and looked at her directly with those kind eyes that seemed to see more than she wanted to reveal. "I don't pity you, Cicely. I admire you tremendously. What you're going through would break most people into pieces they could never reassemble. And you're still standing, still taking care of your daughter, still showing up to life even when life has been incredibly cruel. That takes a strength most people never have to discover in themselves. I don't feel very admirable. I feel stupid for missing all the signs that were probably obvious to everyone except me. Love makes us hopeful, not stupid. There's a profound difference between those two things." Peter paused, choosing his words with obvious care. "After Catherine died, I convinced myself I should have seen it coming, that I'd missed warning signs that would have saved her. My colleagues at the hospital had to sit me down and explain that sometimes terrible things just happen without warning or reason. And beating yourself up for not predicting the unpredictable is just another form of self-torture that serves no purpose." "How did you stop blaming yourself?" "I didn't, not completely. But I started therapy, and I started being honest about how much I was struggling instead of pretending I was fine. And slowly I learned that I could live with the loss without letting it define everything I am or could become." He met her eyes steadily. "You're early in this journey, Cicely. It's okay to not be okay yet. It's okay to be angry and devastated and confused. Those feelings are normal and necessary. They're how you process trauma." Cicely felt something loosen in her chest, like Peter's words had untied a knot she didn't know was there. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Anything. I'm an open book. Why did you tell me about Catherine? You barely knew me when you shared something that intimate." Peter was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "Because when I delivered hope and looked at you, I saw in your eyes the same look I'd seen in my own mirror for 3 years, like you were bracing yourself to survive the unsurvivable, to endure the unendurable. And I wanted you to know it's possible to come out the other side, that you can survive something that feels like it should destroy you completely and still be capable of joy and connection and hope." "I'd like that," Cicely heard herself saying it, surprised by her own honesty. "I'd like to believe I won't always feel this broken and empty." "You're not broken. You're healing, which is fundamentally different. Broken things stay broken. Healing things become stronger at the places where they mended." Peter pulled out his phone. "I'd be honored if you'd call me when you need someone to remind you of that truth, or when you just need someone to talk to about nothing important at all." They exchanged numbers, and it felt like crossing another invisible line between appropriate boundaries and something more complicated. Peter was technically Hope's doctor, even if their connection had nothing to do with medicine anymore. But the bond between them had everything to do with shared understanding of profound loss and the determination to survive it. When Cicely left the hospital later, walking through gardens that were indeed beautiful, with autumn flowers and changing leaves, she felt lighter than she had in weeks. Like maybe she could survive Samuel's betrayal. Like maybe survival was just the beginning of something, and somewhere down the road that she couldn't see yet, there might be actual happiness waiting instead of just endless grief. She drove home to her mother's house where Hope was crying for her next feeding, and Cicely picked up her daughter with hands that didn't shake quite as much as they had that morning. Small progress, incremental healing, but progress nonetheless. And that was enough for now. Chapter 4. The comfort of being seen. Samuel's life with Vanessa wasn't the fairy tale he'd imagined during late-night texts and stolen afternoons that had made him feel alive and desired. She'd been exciting as a secret, all sharp edges and ambition and forbidden passion that made him feel like he was living in a movie rather than the mundane reality of marriage and impending fatherhood. But as his girlfriend, his official partner, his presumed future wife, Vanessa was exhausting in ways that made him question everything he'd destroyed to be with her. She wanted dinner at restaurants he couldn't afford, now that lawyers were draining his accounts faster than he could replenish them. She made cutting comments about his clothes, his car, his modest apartment, comparing him unfavorably to her ex-boyfriend who apparently had better taste and deeper pockets. She expected grand gestures and constant attention, getting angry when he worked late or came home tired from the stress of the divorce and failing business relationships. The irony wasn't lost on Samuel. He'd destroyed his marriage for a woman who was now making him miserable in completely different ways, replacing Cicely's quiet support with constant criticism. His parents had made their position devastatingly clear when he tried to introduce Vanessa at their anniversary dinner at an upscale restaurant he couldn't afford. His mother had taken one look at Vanessa's smug expression and stood up from the table. "We're leaving." His mother had said it directly to Samuel, her voice cold in ways he'd never heard before. "I didn't raise my son to be the kind of man who abandons his pregnant wife. I didn't raise him to be cruel and calculating. Whoever you've become, I don't recognize you anymore." His father's words had cut even deeper. "When you're ready to apologize to Cicely and meet your daughter properly, like a decent human being, you can call us. Until then, we have nothing to say to you. You've disgraced this family and everything we taught you about character and integrity." They'd left the restaurant without ordering, and Samuel hadn't heard from them since, except for a brief text from his mother weeks later. "Your daughter was born healthy. Her name is Hope. She looks like Cicely. You missed it. I hope whatever you think you gained was worth what you threw away." The rejection from his family compounded the rejection from colleagues and clients who genuinely liked Cicely, who'd trusted her judgment and warm personality, who felt personally betrayed by how Samuel had treated her. His reputation was crumbling like a building with faulty foundations, and Vanessa's solution was to relocate somewhere fresh, somewhere people didn't know his history or judge him for his choices. But Samuel couldn't leave. His lawyer had warned him that leaving the state during divorce proceedings and potential custody issues would look terrible to judges, make him seem like he was fleeing responsibility. And despite everything, Samuel still believed he could somehow control the narrative, spin the story so he came out looking less villainous. He was wrong, but he didn't know that yet. He drove past Dolores's house one evening, telling himself he just wanted to see where Hope was living, that it was his right as her biological father to know these things. But when he parked down the street with his lights off and looked through the lit windows like a stalker, what he saw made his chest tight with something that felt uncomfortably like regret. Cicely sat in a rocking chair visible through the window, Hope in her arms, surrounded by her mother and sister. The three women were laughing at something Jolene had said, their faces bright with joy, despite their cramped circumstances. Cicely's face held peace and contentment, despite everything Samuel had put her through. She looked beautiful in that unguarded moment, more beautiful than all of Vanessa's perfectly applied makeup and designer clothes and calculated seduction. Samuel drove away, feeling hollow and confused, unable to articulate even to himself what he'd hoped to accomplish with his surveillance. Meanwhile, Cicely had no idea Samuel was watching her life from the outside, like a ghost. She was too focused on the small miracle of Peter Baker becoming part of her days in ways that felt natural rather than forced. It started innocently enough. Peter texted to check on Hope's feeding schedule, wanting to make sure she was gaining weight properly after the traumatic delivery. Cicely responded with gratitude and a question about developmental milestones she'd read about online. He sent articles about infant care that actually made sense instead of the contradictory nonsense most websites offered. She sent him a picture of Hope sleeping with her tiny hands thrown up by her head in surrender, and he responded with a heart emoji that felt intimate despite its simplicity. The text became daily, then multiple times daily. Good morning messages and good night wishes. Funny observations about hospital life. Questions about how Cicely was coping with single motherhood. Honest admissions about Peter's own struggles with loneliness and purposelessness outside of work. Then Peter invited Cicely to dinner at his place, casual and friendly with no pressure. He specified she should bring Hope so she'd feel comfortable and safe, not trapped with a virtual stranger. Cicely found herself saying yes before she could overthink it and talk. Herself out of taking the risk, Peter's brownstone apartment surprised her when she arrived with Hope in her carrier and a diaper bag, stuffed with everything a baby might need. She'd expected something sterile and modern, but instead found warm wooden floors that creaked pleasantly underfoot, bookshelves stuffed with worn paperbacks that had obviously been read multiple times, and a kitchen that clearly got used regularly for actual cooking rather than just reheating takeout. He'd set up a portable crib in the living room for Hope, thought of everything from burp cloths to a changing station with fresh diapers and wipes, and seemed genuinely delighted when Cicely arrived, looking nervous and beautiful. I wasn't sure what you'd like, so I made 3 different options. Peter gestured to his counter, which held pasta primavera, baked chicken with roasted vegetables, and a vegetarian stir-fry. I tend to overthink things when I'm nervous. You're nervous? Cicely settled Hope in the crib and watched her daughter's eyes start to droop towards sleep. Why would you be nervous? Because you're here, and I want you to have a nice evening, and I'm terrified I'll say something wrong, or you'll realize I'm actually incredibly boring. Peter's honesty was disarming. I haven't done this in a long time. Had someone over who mattered. I matter, Cicely asked softly. You matter. Peter said it with such certainty that she felt something shift in her chest. More than you probably realize. They ate at his small dining table, candles flickering between them, casting warm light across their faces, and talked about things that felt important rather than superficial. Peter admitted he'd become a doctor partly to please his surgeon father, that he'd spent years trying to live up to impossible expectations before Catherine's death made him realize life was too short to perform for others' approval, that he'd been coasting through life on autopilot ever since, going through the motions without actually engaging with anything. Cicely admitted she'd married Samuel partly because he'd made her feel special after a lifetime of feeling invisible, the working-class girl from the wrong neighborhood who never quite fit in anywhere, that she'd sacrificed her own ambitions to support his because his dreams seemed bigger and more important than hers, because making him successful felt like her purpose, that she'd wanted to be a writer once, before Samuel convinced her it wasn't practical, wasn't realistic, wasn't worth pursuing. What kind of stories did you want to write? Peter asked with genuine interest. Romance mostly. Nothing fancy or literary, just stories that made people feel something good. Cicely laughed at herself, embarrassed. It sounds silly now, childish even. It doesn't sound silly at all. The world needs more stories about hope and love and second chances. Peter's voice was earnest. What kind of stories would you write now, after everything you've been through? I'd write about women who survive betrayal and come out stronger. About finding yourself after someone tried to erase you. About second chances and learning to trust again after your trust was shattered. Cicely paused, surprised by her own passion. I'd write stories where the heroine saves herself instead of waiting for someone else to rescue her. You should write those stories. The world needs them, and you're living proof they're possible. The air between them shifted, became charged with possibility and promise. Cicely felt it and was terrified by it in equal measure because she'd been so wrong about Samuel and couldn't trust her own judgment anymore. "I should go." She stood abruptly, suddenly overwhelmed. "Hope will want to feed soon, and I don't want to impose on your evening any more than I already have." "You're not imposing. You could never impose." Peter stood too, moving closer with obvious intention. "Cicely, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it without feeling pressured or obligated in any way." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Okay, I'm falling in love with you." He said it simply, directly, like he was stating a medical fact that couldn't be disputed. "I know it's too soon. I know you're still healing from devastating wounds. I know I'm probably the last complication you need in your life right now. But I also know that pretending I don't feel this way would be dishonest, and I promised myself after Catherine that I'd never waste time hiding from truth again. Life's too short and too fragile to not be honest about what matters." Cicely stared at him, words failing her completely, her mind unable to process what he'd just said. "You don't have to say anything back," Peter continued, his voice gentle. "I just needed you to know where I stand. And whatever you decide, whether you want to explore this or run away from it or take years to figure it out, I'll respect that completely. But I'll also be here hoping you choose to stay." Cicely didn't choose words to respond. She closed the distance between them and kissed him instead, pouring months of loneliness and grief and desperate hope into the connection of their lips. Peter responded immediately, one hand cupping her face with infinite gentleness and the other pulling her closer, kissing her back with a tenderness that made tears spring to her eyes, because this was what affection was supposed to feel like. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cicely whispered against his mouth, "I'm terrified. I'm so scared of being wrong again, of trusting someone who'll destroy me." "Me too." Peter kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the tip of her nose with reverent softness. "But maybe we can be terrified together. Maybe fear is less powerful when you share it with someone who understands." They didn't go further that night. Hope woke up crying, breaking the spell, and the moment passed, replaced by the practical reality of diaper changes and feeding schedules and the everyday demands of caring for an infant. But something fundamental had shifted between them, a door opening to possibility that neither of them wanted to close anymore. When Peter walked Cicely to her car later, carrying Hope's car seat and making sure it was properly secured with the careful attention of someone who genuinely cared, Cicely turned to him before getting in. "This feels too good to be real. Like I'm going to wake up and discover you're another lie," I told myself, "another fantasy that will shatter when reality intrudes." "I'm not a lie." Peter touched her face gently, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "I'm a man who lost everything he loved and spent 3 years convincing himself he'd never feel truly alive again. And then you walked into that delivery room broken and bleeding and fierce, and something in me woke up that I thought had died with Catherine. You're not too damaged for this, Cicely. You're exactly brave enough, exactly strong enough, exactly perfect enough." She drove home with those words warming her from the inside. Hope sleeping peacefully in the back seat. And for the first time, since that terrible phone call from Vanessa, Cicely let herself imagine a future that held something beyond mere survival. Maybe even genuine joy, maybe even love, maybe even a second chance at the happy ending she'd thought Samuel destroyed forever. Chapter 5. Learning to Trust Again. The weeks that followed felt like learning to breathe underwater. Unnatural and terrifying, but somehow possible if you trusted your instincts and didn't panic. Peter became a constant presence in Cicely's life, not overwhelming, but steady in ways that felt foreign after Samuel's hot and cold attention patterns. He'd show up at Dolores's house with dinner when he knew Cicely had been wrestling with lawyers all day, bringing enough food for the whole family and never expecting gratitude or acknowledgement. He'd text her random thoughts that made her laugh at unexpected moments. He'd sit with Hope while Cicely showered, treating her daughter with a tenderness that made Cicely's heart ache with longing for what could be. Jolene watched it all with cautious approval, her protective instincts on high alert after Samuel's betrayal. "He's good to you," she said it one evening while folding Hope's endless laundry, Cicely beside her tackling the mountain of burp cloths that seemed to multiply overnight. "Almost too good, if I'm being honest. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for him to show his true colors." "So do you think he's another Samuel?" Cicely didn't make it a question. "I think you've been hurt badly, and I'm your sister, so I'm allowed to be paranoid on your behalf. It's my job." Jolene softened, setting down the tiny onesie she was folding. "But honestly, he doesn't set off any of my alarm bells. He just seems like a genuinely decent man who cares about you. And that scares me almost as much as if he were obviously terrible, because now you have something real to lose." "That's what terrifies me too," Cicely admitted quietly. "With Samuel, there were red flags I ignored. The late nights, the distance, the way he made me feel small sometimes. But with Peter, everything feels too perfect, and I don't trust my own judgment anymore. What if I'm missing warning signs again? What if I'm so desperate for someone to love me that I'm seeing what I want to see instead of what's really there?" So go slow. Let him prove himself over time through consistent actions rather than words. There's no rush to figure out your entire future right now. Jolene reached over to squeeze Cicely's hand. "You're allowed to be cautious. You're allowed to protect yourself. Just don't let fear prevent you from being open to something good." But slow felt impossible when every moment with Peter made Cicely feel more alive than she had in years of marriage to Samuel. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. His childhood in a wealthy family that valued achievement over affection, where love came with conditions and expectations. Her working-class neighborhood, where everyone knew everyone's struggles and triumphs, where community meant something tangible rather than abstract. Their shared love of old movies and terrible puns and the smell of rain on pavement. Peter told her about Catherine in increasing detail as he grew more comfortable, about their whirlwind courtship and quick marriage, about how he'd loved her fiercely, but always with an undercurrent of fear that he'd lose her, about how that fear had proven prophetic in the worst possible way, becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy he couldn't prevent. "I blame myself for months afterward." He told Cicely this during a late-night phone call when both of them couldn't sleep, their voices soft in the darkness. "I was in the hospital when she died. I was a doctor trained to save lives, and I couldn't save my own wife and son. The guilt and shame nearly destroyed me more completely than the grief did." "How did you survive it?" Cicely asked softly, genuinely wanting to understand his path through devastation. "Therapy. Lots and lots of therapy, and time, which is the most useless advice anyone can give, but also happens to be true, and eventually accepting that I couldn't control everything, that some tragedies just happen regardless of how hard we try to prevent them, that I'm human and fallible and not actually God, despite my medical degree." He paused, his voice growing tender. "Meeting you has been part of my healing too. Seeing your strength and resilience makes me believe people are more resilient than we give ourselves credit for, that we can survive the unsurvivable if we're just stubborn enough to keep breathing through it. I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm barely holding it together with both hands and duct tape." That's what strength looks like sometimes, Cicely, not the absence of struggle, but continuing despite it. Not never falling apart, but getting up each time you do. These conversations built trust between them brick by careful brick, creating a foundation that felt solid even when Cicely's fear tried to undermine it. But physical intimacy remained a bridge Cicely wasn't sure she was ready to cross. You thought of being that vulnerable again, of letting someone see her completely, Her body changed by pregnancy, her heart scarred by betrayal, her soul still raw and wounded, terrified her more than she could articulate. Until the night she decided to be brave anyway. Peter had invited her to dinner again, this time with explicit permission to arrive after Hope's bedtime so Dolores could babysit overnight if Cicely chose to stay. The implication was clear, and Cicely knew what the invitation meant. She spent the entire drive to his apartment talking herself through waves of panic and anticipation, her hands gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled intensity. Peter answered the door in jeans and a soft sweater that made him look approachable and handsome, vulnerability written across his face that somehow eased Cicely's nerves. He'd cooked pasta from scratch, the apartment smelling like garlic and fresh herbs and domestic comfort. They ate by candlelight, while rain drummed against the windows in rhythm, creating a cocoon of intimacy that felt separate from the outside world. The conversation flowed easily, touching on everything from Hope's new sleeping patterns to Peter's challenging case at the hospital to Cicely's tentative attempts at writing again during stolen moments. After dinner, while washing dishes side by side in comfortable silence, Peter turned to her with sudsy hands and naked honesty. "I don't have expectations for tonight. I want you to know that first and foremost. I invited you here because I wanted uninterrupted time with you, without the world demanding things from us. But if you're not ready for anything beyond dinner and conversation, that's completely okay." "More than okay? Your comfort and consent matter more than any desire I might have?" Cicely set down the dish she'd been drying and looked at him, really looked at this man who'd been patient and kind and everything Samuel had never been. Who saw her as a whole person rather than an object to possess or discard. Who made her feel safe in ways she'd forgotten were possible. "I'm terrified," she said it honestly, no defenses. "But I think I'm ready to be terrified with you. I think I'm ready to be brave." Peter dried his hands carefully, deliberately, then took hers and led her to his bedroom. They stood beside his bed in the soft lamplight, neither quite sure how to begin this dance after so much loss. "We can stop any time," Peter promised, his voice rough with emotion and desire. "Say the word, and we stop immediately. No questions, no hurt feelings, no pressure. Your boundaries are sacred to me." "I know." And she did know, bone deep. That was the difference between Peter and Samuel. Peter saw her consent as an ongoing gift she could revoke at any moment, not a one-time permission that gave him unlimited access. Their first time together was tender and fumbling and achingly beautiful. Peter asked permission before every new touch, making sure she was comfortable, following her lead rather than imposing his own agenda. When Cicely's hands shook undoing buttons, he stilled them with his own and kissed her trembling fingers. When she cried unexpectedly as he entered her, overwhelmed by intimacy and emotion rather than pain, he froze and asked if they should stop. No. She pulled him closer desperately, needing this connection more than her next breath. "Don't stop. I just forgot what it feels like to be touched like I matter, like I'm precious, rather than convenient. You matter more than anything." Peter whispered it against her skin like a prayer, punctuating each word with kisses along her collarbone and throat. "You matter to me. You matter to Hope. You matter to this world." They made love slowly, learning each other's rhythms and preferences and boundaries, laughing when elbows bumped awkwardly and gasping when something felt particularly intense and right. It wasn't the earth-shattering passion of romance novels that Cicely used to read and dream about, but it was real and honest and healing in ways she hadn't expected. It was two broken people choosing vulnerability, choosing connection, choosing hope despite knowing intimately how badly hope can hurt. Afterward, they lay tangled together in Peter's bed, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder, while she listened to his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. Thank you for trusting me with this." Peter's voice rumbled through his chest, the vibration comforting. "I know how hard that must have been after everything you've been through." "It was hard," Cicely admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But also easier than I thought it would be. You make me feel safe in ways I didn't think were possible anymore. Like I can be completely myself, messy and scared and imperfect, and you'll still see something worth loving." "I see everything worth loving when I look at you. Your strength, your kindness, your fierce protection of hope, the way you laugh even when life has given you every reason not to." Peter kissed the top of her head tenderly. "You're extraordinary, Cicely Carroll, and I plan to spend as long as you'll let me proving that to you until you believe it yourself." They talked into the early hours, sharing stories and fears and dreams for futures that now seem possible rather than lost. Peter told her he wanted to formally meet Hope as something more than her pediatrician, to be part of her life in meaningful ways if Cicely would allow it. Cicely told him she wanted to write again seriously, that being with him made her remember the woman she'd been before Samuel convinced her she needed to be smaller and quieter to fit into his life. "You're not small." Peter kissed her temple softly. "You're vast and deep and full of possibility. Don't let anyone ever make you forget that again." When Cicely finally left, as dawn painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, Peter walked her to her car and kissed her goodbye like it physically hurt to let her go. "Text me when you get home, so I know you made it safe. And Cicely, last night meant everything to me. You mean everything to me." She drove through empty streets, with her body still humming with the memory of Peter's touch, feeling lighter and more hopeful than she had since the night her life exploded. She'd taken a leap of faith, risked her wounded heart, chosen vulnerability over safety, and instead of being destroyed again, she'd found something worth building. Chapter 6. Building Something Real. Cicely's divorce settlement came through with results that surprised even her lawyer. Armed with Jolene's meticulous documentation of Samuel's fraudulent activities and systematic erasure of Cicely's contributions, the case had been too solid for Samuel's legal team to effectively fight. Cicely was awarded a substantial financial settlement that would give her genuine independence for the first time in her adult life. Samuel was required to pay generous ongoing support for Hope. The house that had been fraudulently transferred to Vanessa was returned to marital assets and liquidated. The proceeds split equally between Cicely and Samuel. It was more than fair. It was justice. Jolene celebrated by taking Cicely out for an expensive dinner at a restaurant they couldn't have afforded before, both sisters laughing and crying over wine that tasted like victory and closure. "You did it." Jolene raised her glass high. "You survived the worst thing that could happen and you won. You actually won." "We did it," Cicely corrected, clinking her glass against her sister's. "I couldn't have managed any of this without you and Mama. You saved me when I couldn't save myself." "And Peter?" Jolene asked with a knowing smile that lit up her whole face. "He's been pretty instrumental in your survival too, hasn't he?" Cicely felt herself blushing like a teenager experiencing her first crush. "Peter has been wonderful, more than wonderful. Sometimes I feel guilty about how happy he makes me, when I should still be mourning my marriage or processing my trauma or whatever I'm supposed to be doing." "Your marriage died long before the divorce papers arrived. Cece, it died the moment Samuel chose cruelty over compassion. You're allowed to be happy. You're allowed to move forward. You're allowed to love again." Jolene reached across the table to squeeze her sister's hand. "Don't let guilt steal your joy. You've earned this happiness." But moving forward felt complicated when Peter's family wanted to meet her officially as his girlfriend rather than just a patient he'd befriended. He'd warned her that Sunday dinners at his parents' house were both beloved tradition and subtle interrogation. that his father could be intimidating, and his mother asked deeply personal questions without shame or apology. "They'll love you," Peter assured her as they drove to his childhood home in Chestnut Hill, Hope sleeping peacefully in her car seat. "But if it gets too intense or uncomfortable, just signal me and we'll make an excuse to leave early. Your comfort matters more than their curiosity." The Baker house was exactly what Cicely expected from Peter's descriptions. Large and elegant without being ostentatious, filled with medical journals and family photographs, and the kind of understated wealth that came from generations of professional success rather than sudden fortune. His mother Eleanor answered the door before they could knock and immediately pulled Cicely into a warm embrace that felt genuine rather than performative. "It's so good to finally meet you properly. Peter talks about you constantly, won't shut up about you, actually." Eleanor's eyes sparkled with good humor when she pulled back to study Cicely's face. "And this must be Hope. Oh, she's absolutely precious. Can I hold her?" Cicely found herself handing over her daughter, watching carefully as Eleanor cradled Hope with the practiced ease of someone who'd raised children and helped raise grandchildren. Peter's father, Thomas, was more reserved but not unkind. He shook Cicely's hand firmly and studied her with the assessing gaze of someone who'd spent decades evaluating people's character and honesty through their body language and word choices. The dinner started with palpable tension on Cicely's part, hyper-aware of using the wrong fork or saying something that revealed her working-class background as inadequate. But then Eleanor asked about Cicely's writing, and somehow they ended up in a passionate discussion about romance novels that Eleanor read voraciously, despite her surgeon husband's gentle teasing about her literary taste. "Don't let Thomas fool you," Eleanor winked conspiratorially. "I caught him crying over a Nicholas Sparks movie last month, absolutely sobbing into his handkerchief. I had something in my eye," Thomas protested with obvious discomfort, but his lips twitched toward a smile that humanized him. Peter's two sisters arrived later with their families, and suddenly the formal dining room filled with noise and laughter, and children running around with the chaotic energy that only kids can generate. Cicely watched Peter hold Hope with natural ease, while simultaneously helping his 10-year-old nephew with math homework, and something in her chest expanded almost painfully with emotion she couldn't quite name. This was what family was supposed to feel like, not the cold distance of Samuel's parents, who'd always made Cicely feel like she wasn't quite good enough for their accomplished son. But this warm, chaotic acceptance that said, "You belong here, you are wanted here, you are valued here exactly as you are." After dinner, while others cleared dishes and the children played a loud game in the living room, Thomas asked Cicely to join him in his study. Her heart hammered with anxiety, sure this was where he'd express concerns about her suitability for Peter, about the baggage she brought, about whether she was using his son as a rebound. Instead, he gestured to a leather chair and poured them both scotch from a crystal decanter, before sitting across from her with serious intent. "My son was barely alive for 3 years after Catherine died. He went through all the motions of living without actually engaging with life." Thomas swirled his drink thoughtfully, choosing words carefully. "He worked obsessively, kept everyone at emotional arm's length, convinced himself he was somehow cursed or dangerous. When he told me about you, I was skeptical, concerned that he was rushing into something to fill a void rather than building something real." "I understand those concerns," Cicely said quietly, her hands tight around her glass. "I worry about the same things myself. But seeing him tonight, seeing the way he looks at you and your daughter, seeing him actually laugh and engage and participate in life again, I understand something important." Thomas met her eyes directly. "You didn't fill a void in Peter's life. You reminded him why life is worth fully living despite the risks inherent in loving anyone. That's a profound gift. He's done the same for me." Cicely felt tears prick her eyes. "He's shown me that Samuel's betrayal doesn't define my capacity to love or be loved." I won't pretend your situation isn't complicated. You're both healing from significant trauma. But I also won't pretend that love waits for convenient timing or ideal circumstances. Thomas set down his glass. If you and Peter are choosing each other with full awareness of the risks and challenges, you have my blessing and my support. Welcome to the family, Cicely. She felt tears slide down her cheeks, overwhelmed by acceptance she hadn't expected and kindness that felt almost too good to be real. Later that night, after they'd said goodbyes and loaded a sleeping Hope into the car, Peter drove them not toward Dolores's house, but toward his apartment. Cicely didn't question it. She understood the unspoken invitation, felt the same need for connection and celebration. Once inside, with Hope settled in the portable crib that now permanently lived in Peter's spare room, they came together with an urgency that had been building all evening. Peter backed Cicely against his bedroom door, kissing her deeply while his hands roamed her body with growing confidence and familiarity. "I love you," he said it against her lips, no hesitation or doubt. "I love you so much, it scares me sometimes. Because I know what it's like to lose everything you love." "I love you too." Cicely pulled his shirt over his head, emboldened by desire and wine, and the certainty that this man was hers in ways Samuel had never been. "Take me to bed, Peter. Make me forget everything except this moment, everything except us." Their lovemaking was different this time. Less tentative, more passionate and exploratory. Peter mapped her body like he was memorizing every curve and mark, worshipping her stretch marks and fuller figure with kisses and whispered praise that made her feel genuinely beautiful instead of just acceptable. Cicely found herself being bold, initiating touches she'd never had the courage to try with Samuel, laughing with delight when they fumbled and gasping with pleasure when something felt particularly intense. "Tell me what you want." Peter's voice was rough with desire as he moved inside her with deliberate slowness. "I want to give you everything you need and desire. This," Cicely arched against him, pulling him deeper with her legs wrapped tight around him. "You, just you, exactly like this, exactly now." They climbed toward release together. Peter's name a repeated prayer on Cicely's lips as pleasure crashed over her in waves that seemed endless. He followed moments later, burying his face in her neck and trembling with the intensity of it all. Afterward, tangled together in sheets damp with sweat and satisfaction, Peter traced patterns on Cicely's bare shoulder and spoke with quiet seriousness. "I want you to move in with me, you and Hope. I want to wake up to you every morning and come home to you every night. I want to be Hope's father in every way that matters, not just legally someday, but in the daily reality of bedtimes and scraped knees and first days of school." Cicely's breath caught. "That's a big step. A really big step." "I know, and if it's too soon, I understand completely. But I also know that I'm completely certain about you, about us, about the future we could build together." He kissed her forehead tenderly. "Think about it. No pressure, no timeline. Just know the offer stands whenever you're ready." Cicely thought about her cramped childhood bedroom in her mother's house, about the life she'd been living that felt temporary and suspended between past and future. Then she thought about this apartment that already felt more like home than anywhere she'd lived with Samuel, about Peter's consistent kindness and steady presence. Yes. She heard herself say it before she'd consciously decided, her heart making the choice her head was still processing. "Yes, I want to move in with you. I want to build a life with you. I want Hope to grow up knowing you as her father from the very beginning." Peter's smile could have lit up the entire city skyline. He kissed her deeply, reverently, like she'd given him an extraordinary gift beyond measure. "We're really doing this. His voice held wonder and disbelief. We're choosing each other despite everything, despite all our wounds and fears. We're choosing each other because of everything, Cicely corrected, her hand on his face. Because we both know intimately what it means to lose everything and survive. Because we don't take love for granted. Because we're brave enough and scarred enough to appreciate what we're building. They made love once more, slow and sweet, and full of promises about futures that finally seemed solid rather than impossible. And when they fell asleep, wrapped around each other with hope sleeping peacefully in the next room, both of them felt like they'd finally come home after years of being lost. Chapter 7. Dangerous Desperation. Samuel's world had completely collapsed in ways he never imagined possible. The house he'd shared with Cicely had been sold, his half of the proceeds immediately seized by lawyers and the IRS for back taxes and penalties he'd somehow accumulated. Vanessa had left him for Gregory, his former colleague and supposed friend, in a betrayal that would have been poetically ironic if Samuel hadn't been too devastated to appreciate the justice of it. His parents refused his calls, returning them unopened with devastating finality. His friends had evaporated like morning fog, unwilling to associate with someone whose scandal reflected poorly on their own reputations. He was living in a studio apartment that smelled perpetually of mildew and desperation, working a soul-crushing sales job that barely covered his bills and child support payments. Everything he'd built over 15 years had crumbled in months, destroyed by his own choices. But what truly broke Samuel, what kept him awake staring at water-stained ceilings in the dark hours before dawn, was finding out through mutual acquaintances that Cicely had moved on completely, that she was living with someone new, that Hope called another man her father and apparently adored him, that Cicely looked radiantly happy in photos people occasionally posted online, glowing in ways she'd never looked with Samuel, even in their supposedly best days. He'd thrown everything away for an affair that lasted less than 6 months after becoming public. He'd destroyed his marriage, his relationship with his parents, his reputation, his career, everything that mattered for a woman who'd used him, and discarded him the moment things became difficult rather than exciting. The regret was suffocating, consuming, inescapable. Samuel started driving past Dolores's house obsessively, then realized with growing desperation that Cicely wasn't there anymore. It took embarrassing amounts of social media stalking and casually questioning people who might know to figure out she'd moved to a brownstone apartment in a nicer neighborhood. When he finally found the address through methods he wasn't proud of, he sat in his car outside for hours, watching her new life unfold through lit windows like a movie he couldn't stop watching. He saw her laughing with a man who held Hope with practiced ease and obvious love, saw them cook dinner together, dancing in the kitchen with the baby between them in domestic bliss, saw them put Hope to bed with a coordinated routine that spoke of genuine partnership, saw them curl up on the couch together afterward, intimate and comfortable in ways Samuel had never managed with Cicely, despite 7 years of marriage. The jealousy was acid in his throat, burning and bitter. He showed up at the door one evening without warning or invitation, pressing the buzzer insistently until someone answered. His heart pounded with anxiety and desperate hope that maybe Cicely would see him and remember what they'd had, that maybe he could explain himself, that maybe forgiveness was possible. Peter opened the door instead, and Samuel felt immediate hatred for this man who'd stolen his family. Peter was handsome and clearly successful, and looked at Samuel with calm assessment rather than fear or anger. "Can I help you?" Peter's voice was polite but firm, holding authority without aggression. "I'm Samuel Pollard. I'm here to see my daughter." Samuel tried to sound confident, but heard the desperation in his own voice. "Hope's father is listed on her birth certificate now, and that person is me through legal adoption. You're the biological..." parent who abandoned her during childbirth and hasn't attempted meaningful contact in months. Peter's voice never rose, but it held steel. You have no legal right to be here, and you're not welcome. I have every right. She's my daughter, my blood. No. Cicely appeared behind Peter, and Samuel's heart clenched painfully at how different she looked from the woman he'd abandoned. Confident, strong, completely beyond his reach now. You gave up any claim to fatherhood when you let Vanessa answer my desperate call while I was in labor, when you signed away your rights without fighting, when you chose calculated cruelty over basic human decency. Cece, please. Samuel hated how his voice cracked with emotion he couldn't control. I made terrible mistakes. I know that now. But I'm trying to fix things, trying to make amends. I want to be part of Hope's life. I want to try to make this right somehow. There is no making this right. Cicely's voice was steady and cold, no tears or wavering. You didn't just leave me, Samuel. You planned your exit for months, maybe years. You erased me from my own life systematically and deliberately. You made me doubt my sanity and worth. You abandoned your daughter before she was born. Those aren't mistakes you can apologize away. Those are choices that revealed exactly who you are at your core. I've changed. I've lost everything. Doesn't that count for something? I don't care. And the indifference in her voice was more devastating than rage or tears would have been. I genuinely don't care if you've changed or suffered or learned important lessons. That's not my concern anymore. My concern is protecting my daughter from people who would hurt her, and you've proven you're at the very top of that list. Peter placed a protective hand on Cicely's shoulder, the gesture casual but claiming. You need to leave now, Samuel. If you show up here again without invitation, we'll file for a restraining order and ensure you never get within 100 yards of this family. Who the hell are you to tell me anything? Samuel's control finally snapped completely. You've known her for what, a few months? You don't get to play father to my daughter. You don't get to tell me. I'm the man who held her hand through the delivery you should have been present for. Peter's calm never wavered, which somehow made his words more powerful and cutting. I'm the man who's been there for every midnight feeding, every pediatrician visit, every milestone and moment you chose to miss. I'm the man Cicely trusts with her heart and her daughter's safety. And I'm the man who's going to close this door now. Goodbye, Samuel. Don't come back. The door shut firmly in Samuel's face, leaving him standing on the stoop with the weight of everything he'd lost crushing him completely. He heard voices inside, Cicely crying, but not because of him. Peter comforting her with obvious tenderness, Hope babbling happily in the background. The sounds of a family he'd destroyed and could never, ever reclaim. Inside the apartment, Peter held Cicely while she shook with reaction rather than grief or renewed heartbreak. I'm sorry. Peter kissed her hair repeatedly, his voice rough with protective anger. I'm sorry he showed up here and forced you to see him. I'm sorry he violated your peace. Don't be sorry. Cicely pulled back to look at him directly. I needed that confrontation. I needed to see him and feel absolutely nothing except relief that he's not part of my life anymore. She touched Peter's face tenderly. And I needed him to see what I have now, what he could have had if he'd been a better man, what he threw away. They stood in the entryway for a long moment, holding each other, reinforcing their commitment without words. Then Hope called for them from her crib, where she'd been napping, and they went to her together. Peter scooped her up, while Cicely stroked her daughter's dark curls with infinite gentleness. Dada. Hope patted Peter's face with her tiny hands, and his eyes filled with emotion. That's right, sweetheart. I'm your Dada, and I'm never leaving you or your mama. That's a promise I'll keep until my last breath. Later that evening, after Hope was asleep and the adrenaline from Samuel's appearance had finally faded, Peter and Cicely found comfort in each other's arms. Their lovemaking was fierce and claiming, both of them needing to reassert their connection, to prove that what they had was real and unshakable and worth fighting for. You're mine. Peter said it against Cicely's skin as his body moved with hers. Say it, I need to hear you say it out loud. I'm yours. Cicely gasped as pleasure built toward its inevitable peak. Only yours, forever yours, no one else's. They climbed together toward release, both of them crying out as waves of pleasure swept through them. And afterward they lay tangled together while their hearts slowly returned to normal rhythm. "Marry me," Peter said it suddenly, propping himself up to look at Cicely with complete seriousness. "Not someday or eventually, soon. I know we've talked about building a life together, about you moving in, but I want it official. I want you to be my wife. I want Hope to legally be my daughter. I want the whole world to know without question that you're mine and I'm yours." Cicely felt joy explode in her chest like fireworks. "Yes, God, yes. I'll marry you." They sealed the promise with kisses and whispered plans about small ceremonies and family celebrations and futures that stretched out bright and infinite before them like an open road toward happiness. And miles away across the city, Samuel sat in his depressing apartment, staring at photographs from happier times, and finally understanding the true cost of his choices with devastating clarity. He'd traded everything real and meaningful for something shiny and temporary, and now he had nothing at all except regret that tasted like poison and felt like dying slowly. Chapter 8. The Obstacles Before Happiness. Peter's proposal was everything Cicely had dreamed of, and nothing like she'd expected from romance novels. There was no grand public gesture with hidden photographers or flash mobs, no elaborate surprise with family hiding and waiting to celebrate. Just the two of them in Peter's apartment after Hope fell asleep. Peter taking Cicely's hand and telling her with raw honesty that he wanted to spend every remaining day of his life loving her and their daughter with everything he had. The ring he produced was a family heirloom, passed down from his grandmother to his mother, who'd given it to Peter years ago with explicit instructions to only use it when he was absolutely certain beyond any doubt. "I'm certain." Peter slipped it onto Cicely's finger, the sapphire and diamond band fitting perfectly like it had been made specifically for her. "I've never been more certain of anything in my entire life." They called their families immediately, unable to contain their joy. Eleanor cried happy tears over the phone, saying she'd prayed Peter would find love again. Dolores showed up 20 minutes later with champagne and Jolene in tow, both of them laughing and crying simultaneously. The celebration was small and intimate and absolutely perfect, full of laughter and plans and the kind of joy that comes from watching people you love find genuine happiness against all odds. But joy never exists in pure form without complications trying to intrude. The first complication came from the hospital ethics board, arriving as a formal letter that made Peter's hands shake when he opened it. An anonymous complaint had been filed, suggesting Peter had pursued a romantic relationship with a patient's mother, potentially violating professional boundaries and hospital policy. Peter assured Cicely it was routine, that he'd documented everything properly and meticulously, that their relationship had begun well after Cicely was discharged, and Hope was no longer under his direct care. But the investigation created stress that manifested in Peter becoming withdrawn and short-tempered in uncharacteristic ways. He snapped at Cicely over small things like dishes left in the sink, apologized immediately with obvious remorse, then retreated into himself in ways that reminded her too much of Samuel's emotional distance before the affair revelation. "Talk to me." Cicely cornered him one evening after he'd been particularly quiet, staring at his laptop for hours without actually accomplishing anything. "Tell me what's going on in your head, instead of shutting me out and making me guess." "I'm terrified. I'm going to lose my medical license over loving you." Peter's voice was raw with fear and vulnerability. "I spent my entire adult life building my career, proving myself, becoming the kind of doctor who saves lives. And one anonymous complaint could destroy everything I've worked for." Without medicine, without being a doctor, I don't know who I am anymore. You're the man I love with my entire heart. You're hope's father in every way that matters. You're someone who shows up for people even when it's hard or inconvenient. Cicely took his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. Your career doesn't define your worth as a human being, Peter. You do. Your character, your kindness, your integrity, those define you. But what if being with me cost you everything you've built? What if you'd be better off without me and all the complications I bring? Stop that right now. Cicely kissed him hard, cutting off the self-destructive spiral before it could gain momentum. I'm not better off without you. I'm infinitely better with you, exactly as you are, career or no career, complications and all. We're going to get through this together, and we're going to come out stronger on the other side. They started couples counseling at Cicely's insistence, both of them recognizing they needed professional tools for handling stress without falling into old destructive patterns of shutdown and distance. The therapist was a kind woman who'd specialized in trauma and helped Peter articulate his deep-seated fear that he'd already failed one family by not saving Catherine. And now he was failing Cicely by bringing scandal into her carefully rebuilt life. You're not failing anyone, the therapist said gently but firmly. You're human, which means you're imperfect and struggling and learning as you go. That's not failure. That's the reality of existence. What matters is that you keep showing up, keep communicating, keep choosing each other even when things get difficult. The ethics hearing arrived on a grey afternoon that felt appropriately somber. Threatening rain that never quite materialized. Peter presented his case clearly and thoroughly. He delivered hope while on duty, but his personal relationship with Cicely had begun weeks later through chance encounters and mutual choice after she was fully discharged. He documented their first coffee together, their first dinner, every significant step of their relationship in his personal journal, specifically to avoid any hint of ethical complications or impropriety. The board deliberated for what felt like hours, while Peter and Cicely waited in the hallway, holding hands and barely breathing. When they were finally called back, the chairman delivered the verdict with bureaucratic formality. No violation had occurred based on the evidence and timeline. However, Peter was advised to be more careful about boundaries with patients' families in the future to avoid even the appearance of impropriety. The relief was overwhelming and immediate. Peter pulled Cicely into his arms right there in the hospital corridor and held her like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to earth. I thought I was going to lose everything again. His voice shook against her hair. I thought loving you was going to cost me the only other thing I had left that defined who I was. But it didn't. We made it through intact. Cicely pulled back to look at him with fierce love. And we're going to keep making it through whatever comes next because we choose each other every single day, in the easy moments and the hard ones. That night, after they'd celebrated with both their families and put Hope to bed with extra cuddles, Peter and Cicely found themselves in bed together with renewed appreciation for what they'd almost lost and what they'd managed to protect. Their lovemaking was slow and deliberate and achingly tender, Peter taking his time to worship every inch of Cicely's body while she trembled beneath his devoted attention. When he finally entered her, it was with a kind of reverence that made tears spring to her eyes from the sheer emotional intensity. I love you so much. Peter moved inside her with agonizing slowness, drawing out every sensation. I love everything about you. Your strength that never quits. Your kindness, even after being treated cruelly. The way you laugh at my terrible jokes. The way you love Hope with your whole heart and no reservations. I love all of it, every single part of you. Show me. Cicely wrapped her legs around him, pulling him deeper. Show me exactly how much you love me. Peter did, bringing her to release twice before allowing himself to follow. And afterward they lay tangled together in the darkness, both of them feeling like they'd survived another crucial test and emerged stronger for it. "Let's set a date," Cicely said suddenly into the comfortable silence, "for the wedding. I don't want to wait any more, or let fear make us hesitate. I want to be your wife officially, legally, completely, and publicly." "Spring," Peter suggested, tracing idle patterns on her bare shoulder. "In the hospital gardens where we first really talked, where our relationship began shifting into something more." "Perfect," Cicely kissed him softly. "Absolutely perfect. Full circle from where we started." They started planning immediately with infectious enthusiasm, keeping it small and intimate, just family and genuinely close friends. No elaborate production, nothing designed to impress people whose opinions didn't matter. Eleanor helped enthusiastically with flowers and catering. Dolores commissioned a dress from a talented local seamstress. Jolene organized the logistics with military precision that made everyone laugh. Through it all, Hope grew and thrived beautifully, hitting developmental milestones, while completely unaware that the man she called Dada wasn't biologically related to her. Peter started formal adoption proceedings with the help of an excellent family lawyer, and Samuel, broken and defeated in his studio apartment across town, signed the papers without protest when they arrived via certified mail. His lawyer had advised him bluntly that fighting would be expensive and ultimately futile, that he'd abandoned his rights when he'd abandoned Cicely in labor, that the best thing he could possibly do for Hope was let her have the father who'd actually shown up consistently for her. Samuel signed with a pen that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, each stroke of his signature an acknowledgement that he'd destroyed the most important thing in his life, and there was absolutely no way back, no redemption arc, no second chance for someone who'd been as cruel as he'd been. Chapter 9. The Final Preparations. Spring arrived with cherry blossoms painting the city in shades of pink and white, with the promise of new beginnings hanging in the air like perfume. Hope's adoption finalized on a morning so beautiful it felt like the universe itself was celebrating their family becoming legally official. Peter cried openly in the courthouse while holding his daughter, truly his daughter now in every possible way, and thanking Cicely for trusting him with the most precious part of her life. They framed the adoption certificate with care and hung it in Hope's nursery alongside photographs that showed their blended family in all its imperfect beauty. Cicely glowing with hard-won happiness, Peter looking at her like she hung every star in the sky. Hope grinning with her first teeth showing, all of them surrounded by grandparents and aunts and uncles who loved them unconditionally without reservation. The wedding preparations consumed the final weeks before the ceremony with joyful chaos. Cicely wrote her vows late at night while Peter slept beside her, trying desperately to capture in inadequate words what he meant to her. Safety and passion intertwined, steadiness and excitement coexisting, healing and growth tangled together in ways that defied easy description or simple categories. Peter struggled with his vows too, wanting to express not just how much he loved Cicely, but how she'd fundamentally saved him from a life of half-living, how she'd reminded him that love was always worth the inevitable risk of loss, how she'd made him believe in second chances when he'd convinced himself he didn't deserve them. They'd decided on an evening ceremony in the hospital gardens, using the space where their relationship had shifted from doctor and patient's mother to something infinitely more complex and meaningful. The irony wasn't lost on either of them, building their future in the place where Cicely had been at her most vulnerable and Peter had first recognized her extraordinary strength. The night before the wedding, tradition dictated they sleep apart for the last time as unmarried people. Peter stayed at his parents' house in his childhood bedroom, while Cicely remained in their apartment with Hope, surrounded by Dolores and Jolene, who treated it like an old-fashioned slumber party, complete with wine and laughter and too many romantic comedies playing in the background. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" Jolene asked during a quiet moment while Dolores had taken Hope to change her diaper in the other room. Terrified, Cicely admitted without hesitation. Not about marrying Peter. That's the easiest decision I've ever made in my life. But about whether I deserve this kind of happiness, after everything that happened, whether the universe will let me keep it. Stop that right now, Cece. Jolene took her sister's hands firmly. You deserve every bit of happiness you get, and infinitely more. You survived betrayal and abandonment that would have destroyed weaker people. You rebuilt your entire life from absolute nothing. You raised Hope alone until Peter came along. You chose to be brave when it would have been so much easier to hide forever. You deserve this happiness completely. I just keep waiting for something terrible to happen, for the other shoe to drop. Something terrible will happen eventually, because that's the nature of life. It's beautiful and brutal in equal measure. But you and Peter will handle it together with all the tools you've built, and that's what makes this different from Samuel. Jolene squeezed her hands. Peter shows up consistently. He stays even when things get difficult. He chooses you every single day, through actions, rather than just words. Tomorrow, you're marrying a genuinely good man who loves you completely. Let yourself be happy about that without waiting for disaster. Cicely nodded through tears, letting herself believe her sister's wise words. Meanwhile, across town in his childhood bedroom, surrounded by trophies and old textbooks, Peter was having a remarkably similar conversation with his father in the den downstairs. Catherine would have loved Cicely deeply. Thomas said it quietly, the first time he'd mentioned Peter's first wife in connection with his upcoming marriage. She would have been genuinely happy you found someone who makes you smile and laugh again, who reminds you how to fully live. I hope so. Peter stared at his hands. Sometimes I feel guilty, like I'm somehow betraying Catherine's memory by being this happy with someone else, like loving Cicely means forgetting Catherine. Love isn't finite or exclusive, son. Loving Cicely doesn't diminish or erase what you felt for Catherine. It just means your heart was big enough to survive unimaginable tragedy and still have room for profound joy. Thomas paused meaningfully. Catherine's gone, and that's heartbreaking and unfair and tragic, but you're still alive, and you're allowed to live fully and completely. She would have wanted that for you without question. Thank you. Peter's voice was rough with emotion. I genuinely needed to hear that permission from you. The wedding day dawned clear and absolutely perfect, warm enough to celebrate comfortably outdoors, but not so hot as to be uncomfortable. Cicely woke early to Hope's babbling, feeding her daughter while watching the sunrise paint her bedroom in shades of gold and pink that felt prophetic. By afternoon, the apartment was organized chaos that somehow worked. Dolores steaming the dress with careful attention, Jolene doing Cicely's makeup with an artist's precision, Eleanor arriving with the most stunning flowers anyone had seen, Hope being passed between doting grandmothers who'd become genuine best friends through their children's relationship. When Cicely finally put on her dress, a simple but elegant ivory gown that made her feel beautiful without trying too hard to impress, the room fell into reverent silence. Oh, honey? Dolores pressed her hand to her mouth, tears already streaming down her face. You look absolutely stunning, like an angel. Peter's going to lose his mind when he sees you, Jolene added, grinning through her own tears. This is absolutely perfect. You're perfect. Hope, dressed in a tiny white dress with fresh flowers woven into her dark curls, clapped her hands enthusiastically and said, "Mama pretty," which made everyone cry and laugh simultaneously. They arrived at the hospital gardens as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting everything in that magical golden hour light that photographers dream about. Chairs were arranged in an intimate semicircle facing an arbor covered in climbing roses and wisteria. The guest list was deliberately small. Peter's parents and siblings with their families, Dolores and Jolene, a handful of close friends from the hospital, and some cousin Cicely hadn't seen since before Samuel, but who'd reached out with support after hearing about the divorce. Peter waited at the arbor in a dark suit that made him look impossibly handsome and vulnerable, his brother beside him as best man. When he saw Cicely walking toward him with hope in her arms, she'd adamantly refused to be walked down the aisle by anyone, choosing instead to carry her daughter into this new chapter as a declaration of their journey. His face transformed with such pure, unfiltered love that several guests gasped audibly. Cicely reached him and handed Hope to Eleanor, who sat in the front row, ready to keep the baby entertained during the ceremony. Then Cicely took Peter's hands and looked at the man who'd helped her rebuild everything Samuel had destroyed, who'd shown her what real love looked like. The officiant, a hospital chaplain who'd become a friend to both of them, began with beautiful words about second chances and choosing love, despite knowing intimately how fragile and precious it can be. Then it was time for vows, and Peter went first with a voice steady despite the emotion swimming in his eyes. Cicely, when I met you, I was barely alive in any meaningful sense. I'd spent 3 years going through the motions of living without actually feeling anything real or significant. Then you showed up in the worst moment of your life, bleeding and abandoned and fierce, and somehow your strength and courage and absolute refusal to be destroyed by betrayal reminded me why life is worth living fully. You didn't save me, you reminded me I could save myself. You gave me permission to love again, to hope again, to believe that joy and loss can coexist without diminishing each other. I promise to honor your strength without ever taking it for granted. I promise to show up for you and hope every single day, without exception. I promise to choose you, to cherish you, to love you with everything I have for all the days we're given together. You are my second chance at happiness, and I will spend my life being worthy of that extraordinary gift. Cicely was crying before he finished, and when it was her turn to speak, her voice wavered but held strong. Peter, you met me when I was broken, and never once treated me like I needed fixing. You saw my wounds and my strength simultaneously, and you loved both without trying to change either. You've shown me what real love looks like. Not ownership or control, but genuine partnership and mutual respect, and choosing each other every day. You've loved my daughter like she's yours from the very beginning, and watching you become her father has been one of the greatest joys of my entire life. I promise to trust you with my heart, even when fear tells me to protect myself. I promise to be brave enough to let you see all of me, the beautiful parts and the messy, broken parts alike. I promise to choose you, to build with you, to love you with everything I am for as long as we both shall live. You gave me back my belief in happy endings and second chances. Now let's write ours together for the rest of our lives. The officiant pronounced them married with obvious joy, and Peter kissed Cicely like a man who'd been given back everything he thought he'd lost forever. The small crowd erupted in cheers and applause, Hope clapping along without understanding why, everyone crying and laughing and celebrating two people who'd survived their worst nightmares and found each other on the other side. The reception was held in a private room at the hospital, intimate and absolutely perfect, full of delicious food and music and toasts that made everyone emotional. Thomas gave a speech about watching his son come back to life. Dolores talked about her daughter's incredible strength and resilience. Jolene roasted them lovingly while crying through her entire speech, making everyone laugh and cry simultaneously. Peter and Cicely shared their first dance as husband and wife to a song about second chances and finding home in another person. And halfway through the song, Peter pulled Hope from Eleanor's arms and danced with both his wife and daughter, the three of them swaying together while their families watched with undisguised joy and love. As the evening wound down naturally and guests began filtering out with warm hugs and congratulations, Peter pulled Cicely close and whispered in her ear with obvious desire. "Ready to start forever, Mrs. Baker? I've been ready since the night you delivered Hope and looked at me like I was strong instead of broken." Cicely kissed him softly, tasting champagne and promise. Let's go home to our life. They left the reception early with their family's blessing, Eleanor and Dolores staying behind with Hope, so the newlyweds could have their wedding night completely alone. Peter carried Cicely over the threshold of their apartment in time-honored tradition, and once the door closed behind them with finality, they came together with all the passion and promise of two people who'd fought through hell to find each other. Their lovemaking was everything a wedding night should be, celebratory and tender, passionate and playful, meaningful and joyful all at once. They took their time exploring each other like it was simultaneously the first time and the 1,000th time, whispering promises and declarations between kisses that tasted like champagne and forever. I love you more than I knew it was possible to love anyone. Peter said it repeatedly while they moved together in perfect rhythm. I love you, I love you, I love you. I love you too with everything I am. Cicely gasped as pleasure built toward its peak. Forever! I love you forever. They climbed together toward release and fell together into bliss, crying out each other's names as waves of pleasure crashed over them. And afterward, they lay tangled in sheets and happiness and complete contentment, both of them feeling like they'd survived every trial specifically so they could find their way to this perfect moment. We did it. Cicely traced patterns on Peter's chest, listening to his heartbeat slow. We actually made it through everything and came out whole on the other side. We did more than survive. Peter kissed the top of her head. We built something beautiful from ruins, and this is just the beginning of our story, not the end. Chapter 10. The Wedding That Rewrote Everything. The honeymoon in the Caribbean was exactly what they needed after months of stress and planning. 7 days of sunshine and turquoise water, sleeping late and making love at odd hours, completely disconnected from reality's demands. They video-called Hope daily, both of them missing their daughter terribly, but also recognizing they needed this time alone to solidify their bond as husband and wife. They returned home refreshed to their apartment, which no longer felt like Peter's place or Cicely's place, but genuinely theirs. Hope had grown in just a week, or maybe it was their perspective that had shifted, making everything feel more precious and significant. Life settled into a beautiful rhythm that felt almost impossibly perfect. Peter worked at the hospital with renewed passion, coming home to Cicely and Hope with energy instead of exhaustion. Cicely started writing seriously again, carving out time during Hope's naps to work on stories about second chances and women who survived. Her first completed manuscript was rough but honest, and Peter read it with genuine pride before encouraging her to submit it to agents. Dolores and Eleanor became inseparable, attending book clubs together and spoiling Hope with equal enthusiasm. Jolene started dating a kind lawyer from her firm, someone steady who made her laugh. Months passed, then a full year, then more. Hope grew from infant to toddler to preschooler, from first words to full sentences to endless questions, calling Peter Dada with complete certainty that he was her father in every way that mattered. They bought a house with a backyard where Hope could play, painting her room together and planning for potential siblings in the future. Cicely's book sold to a small press specializing in women's fiction, and she held the published copy in her hands, with tears streaming down her face, feeling like she'd reclaimed a part of herself that Samuel had convinced her to abandon. Peter threw her a launch party where their families celebrated this woman who'd rebuilt her entire life. Samuel, if they thought about him at all anymore, had become a cautionary tale rather than a source of pain. Cicely occasionally wondered what happened to him through the grapevine. Heard he'd moved somewhere far away, that he'd lost everything and was slowly rebuilding a life that bore no resemblance to what he'd once had. She felt nothing about it except mild relief that he was distant from Hope. One evening, several years after their wedding, Cicely and Peter sat on their back porch, watching Hope chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. Cicely pregnant again with their second child. Do you ever think about where we'd be if Samuel hadn't destroyed your marriage? Peter asked quietly. Sometimes, Cicely leaned against him. But mostly I think about how grateful I am that he did, because it led me to you. Not grateful for the pain, but grateful for the outcome. I think about Catherine too, about whether she'd approve of us, of this life. Peter's hand rested on Cicely's small bump, protectively. And I choose to believe she would be happy I found you, rather than spending my life mourning alone. I think Samuel will spend his life mourning what he threw away. Cicely said it without malice. And I hope someday he finds whatever peace he can. But that's not my concern anymore. My concern is this family we've built, this life we're creating together. Hope ran to them breathless and laughing, climbing into Peter's lap with grass-stained knees. He kissed her forehead and settled her against his chest. And Cicely watched her husband and daughter with bone-deep contentment. Later that night, after Hope was asleep and they'd locked up the house, Peter and Cicely made love with the practiced intimacy of long-term partners who'd learned each other's bodies and souls. There was no desperation or urgency, just steady passion and deep affection. I love our life, Cicely whispered against Peter's shoulder afterward. Everything about it, the mundane mornings and the hard days and the beautiful moments and all of it together. Me too. Peter pulled her closer. I love you. I love Hope. I love this baby growing inside you. I love the family we've become and the future we're building brick by brick. They fell asleep tangled together, secure in the knowledge that they'd survived their worst nightmares and chosen to build something beautiful from the ruins. And somewhere far away, in a small apartment, in a city where nobody knew his history, Samuel Pollard sat alone, looking at old photographs of a life he'd destroyed. He thought about Cicely's laugh, about Hope's first ultrasound picture, about everything he'd thrown away for something temporary. He understood now, too late to change anything, that he'd had everything worth having and hadn't recognized it until it was irreversibly gone. That the woman he'd abandoned at her most vulnerable had been the best thing that ever happened to him, and he'd destroyed her trust with such calculated cruelty that there was no redemption, no forgiveness, no second chance for someone like him. His regret was absolute and permanent, but it changed nothing for Cicely and Peter. Their happiness didn't require his suffering, and his misery didn't diminish their joy. And in Philadelphia, in a house filled with laughter and love and hope for tomorrow, Cicely Baker fell asleep in her husband's arms, their daughter safe in the next room, completely unburdened by thoughts of the man who'd once tried to break her. She'd survived. She'd thrived. She'd found her happy ending, despite everything working against her, and that was the greatest victory of all, living so fully and joyfully that the person who tried to destroy you became irrelevant, a footnote in a story that was always meant to have a beautiful conclusion. The end.